All right, let's get started then. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So our webinar today is Embedding Biodiversity in Social Housing. We've got Flagship's approach. And we're joined by Daniel Salis. Hopefully I've said that right.
Yeah, all good.
Who is the Biodiversity and Land Manager at Flagship. And here he leads the organisation's efforts to support nature recovery across the land and improve access to nature within the communities that it serves. So he's joining us today to explore how Flagship is embedding biodiversity into its housing landscapes, working with in-house gardening teams to create meadows on nearly 250 sites across the east of England. And delivering green space improvement projects and raising awareness across the organisation. So Dan's going to start off in a minute with a presentation. And if you have any questions for Dan today, please pop them in our Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. And we'll try and cover these at the end. Session's about 45 minutes long. So thank you, Daniel. I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So so I'm Dan Salis. I'm the biodiversity lab manager at Flagship Housing. So it's a housing association based in the east of England. You may see on the screen Bromford Flagship. So in the last year or so, we've gone through a merger with another housing association that covers the west of England called Bromford. So the parent organisation is called Bromford Flagship, and the two organisations are kind of operating as they were for now, as that kind of integration process happens. So prior to Flagship, I've been there for about almost 4 years. Before Flagship, I was a researcher at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, working on a few different biodiversity projects, mainly in the data side of those projects. So what I'm going to talk to you today is a kind of why us as a housing association would want to do something about nature recovery and biodiversity, what we are doing, and kind of some future opportunities or avenues that we may kind of be thinking about to go down. So and really, I guess it's kind of like a bit of an example of some of the stuff that's going on in the sector more widely. Biodiversity is kind of an upcoming, increasingly valued area of work in social housing. It's really collaborative, and it's great that it's kind of getting the attention that it really deserves, especially for these organisations that hold a lot of land across the country. So just thinking about why we would do something around nature. I mean, there's that, this will be preaching to the converted, I'm sure, but there's that obvious kind of logical those steps around, we know that we depend on nature. We know that nature is threatened, and if we depend on it, therefore we are threatened. So that kind of forms the key argument for why we would want to take action on nature. We know that nature provides us with all of these ecosystem services to the tune of, 1.8 trillion pounds of asset value in the UK. Damage to those ecosystem services damages us, so we need to protect those processes that upholds that. We also know that nature provides so many social benefits, and for us in social housing who want to improve people's lives, improve people's social mobility, to do that we need improved skill development, we need good physical health, we need good mental health, and we know that nature underpins all of those things. So protecting our green spaces and our local nature is really key to that, and kind of achieving our aims of improving people's lives. We know that nature is at risk. We've seen terrible population declines over the last few decades. We know that we're in a really dire situation, especially in our country, which is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. So, if we know that the entity that underpins all this, this foundation for living healthy lives, we know we need to do something about it. And we know that decline in nature means that we are therefore at risk as well. The World Economic Forum sees biodiversity loss as one of the key risks over the next 10 years. We know that nature loss is going to have a serious impact on on our economy, and we know how difficult it is to achieve our aims of improving people's lives, delivering social housing, when the economy is in a bad way. So again, that's why action on nature is so critical for us in social housing. We are seeing kind of responses to nature loss at a government level, with the caveat of recent kind of government rhetoric around nature and planning, but we know that there are policies that impact us directly, like the Environment Act with biodiversity net gain, and how that influences how we design and build new estates and new social housing. The government's got its own national biodiversity strategy for the Kunming protocols, and things like nutrient neutrality, which came in fairly quickly overnight when it first came through, which affects us especially in Norfolk, and directly impacts our ability to build new homes and provide new affordable homes. So for us, we need to be competent and understanding of nature policy and how we can manage nature on our land, so that we can be flexible and agile to these changes in policy when they come about. We know that we know that finance markets are kind of responding to nature with different institutions looking at the risk profile of their investments. More and more institutions choosing to invest in opportunities that they know will safeguard nature. And again, for us, who depend heavily on these large financial institutions, knowing that they're going to be looking at nature risk and things like that, again reflects our need to do something about it. And there's as I've said before, there's a kind of a stronger push around nature and housing at the moment. You see more and more housing associations producing nature plans or nature recovery strategies or kind of biodiversity plans, and it's certainly a growing trend to see this, and that's certainly typified in the Biodiversity and Housing Network, which is a kind of a voluntary network of people working on biodiversity and housing, coming together, sharing best practice information, sharing management guidance or grant information, all of these things that we can tap into. So it's quite a nice collaborative kind of helping space at the moment, which is really good to see. And we've got our own response to nature. In a couple of years ago, we produced our first biodiversity plan, which kind of sets out our kind of aspirational approach to addressing nature loss on our land. So what I'm going to do is kind of talk you through the key areas of work in that plan, and what we've been doing so far on that. So we produced this plan focusing on 5 key areas. We have our grounds maintenance team, which is in-house, which gives us a lot of control over how we manage our land, and was really kind of seen as the key, the most obvious area of focus for us, because we manage so much land across the east of Anglia, and we've got our grounds maintenance team that we can influence the methods of, that we could then proliferate out across our sites. Land regeneration projects was another area which where the grounds maintenance side of things was more about changing a method and letting that spread out across as many sites as possible. The land regeneration projects is more of kind of an ad hoc, place-based project basis, where a site might need a particular level of kind of TLC, or the residents there might have a particular desire for using a plot of land, and it kind of had a bit more of a kind of a co-designed element to it. We've obviously got our new developments and how we collaborate with our development team to incorporate best practice around biodiversity net gain and designing nature into those new estates. And then it's kind of how do we monitor and evaluate and track our progress with our biodiversity efforts, and how do we communicate with people? How do we bring people along on this kind of journey with us and raise that awareness around biodiversity? So I'll talk through these areas and kind of explain what we've been doing on it so far. So with our grounds maintenance teams, previously we'd been managing our green spaces, our urban green spaces, in a way that you'd kind of expect from industry norms over the last few decades, of keeping our grass very short, neat and tidy, keeping our hedges neat and tidy, and cutting them every year, which obviously doesn't produce a lot of diversity in habitats for wildlife, doesn't produce that much interest for residents. There's no invitation to use these spaces either. There's no benches or pathways. And what we wanted to get to is a state where we've got a diversity of mowing regimes on our land. We're identifying opportunities to let hedges grow longer. We're installing benches. We're mowing through paths, little features that just kind of invite people into a space and show them that it's for them to use. And I throw this this diagram on the right around internally quite a lot to show that people that yes, you can have a very neat and tidy green space, but it's almost sterile to life. Whereas something that to some people might look a bit messy, it's actually a lot more valuable for nature and therefore valuable for us. So what we did, we started in 2023 and we picked 34 pilot sites and said to our grounds maintenance teams, you know those sites better than anyone. Why don't you design areas where we can kind of relax the mowing, allow it to grow up in spring and summer, and we'll see how that goes and monitor the engagement that we get from that. So we're lucky that we've got really good GIS data at Flagship, so it was really easy to map out where we'd like to see those meadow areas go, and make that available for everyone in Flagship to be able to see where they are. And then prior to starting that meadow season, we sent out letters to residents informing them what we were going to do. We sent out surveys throughout the season to gather feedback as we went, and then we sent out a letter at the end of the season summarising what we'd done, addressing any frequently raised issues that we got from the surveys, and then kind of had to sit down and assess what we do, and that's been a rolling process since then. So the second year we did an extra 160 sites, and then the year after that, so this year we've done roughly another 120 sites. And it's really been interesting to just, would you give our grounds maintenance teams a bit more autonomy over the sites they manage, some of the skills which perhaps had not been valued as much in the previous way of doing things. A lot of people had a lot more kind of botanical skills than we thought, or had come from different backgrounds where they'd been managing a land for certain reasons, and yeah, to give people that greater autonomy, also increase some of the staff satisfaction scores that we had from that year, which was really good. So this is some of the pictures of the results of some of our meadows over the years. What we do is when we start a new meadow, we allow it to grow up from May until July and see what's in the seed bank. And if there's any changes that need to be made over that season, we can do. And we like to be flexible with residents if they come back and say, oh, that was the field that the kids were having picnics on or playing games on. We certainly don't want to take away access of green space through the meadows. We want to be able to make space for both. So that's where we can be flexible and change the shape of the meadows or put them in a different location. And then in the autumn, so we cut them at back at the start of August, and then in the autumn we go back, cut them again, and put down wildflower seeds for the subsequent seasons. But certainly it's been really good to see kind of more colour. I like this picture in the bottom right, which shows how where we've been cutting a short path through. If you have a dry spell, it kind of dries up and the grass dies off really quickly, when the meadow either side is a lot better at retaining that water and stays lusher for longer. And we also put signs in the meadow areas with a QR code, so any passers-by who perhaps weren't captured by our letters or surveys can scan and leave some feedback. So just to show kind of the progress that we've made over the last few years. So we started quite small in 2023 and increased kind of gradually over the next 2 years, with the idea that eventually we'll roll this out to all of our 1,200 sites or so by the end of 2030. And it's just great to see the kind of what would have been just the same green kind of desert almost. You introduce more diversity, you see more colour, and each one kind of looks different. And that area that we've been managing now covers around 17 football pitches worth of meadow across East Anglia, which is really good to see. And it's great that we've been allowed to go for scale with biodiversity approaches rather than kind of going site by site on a pilot basis. And then other kind of areas in our grounds maintenance kind of piece of work is, we're starting to map out hedges where some of those will be allowed to grow a bit longer. We have a lot of cases where hedges need to be cut regularly for access and pathways and things, but there will be ones that we can leave to grow longer and provide more opportunity for nature. We've started trials around removing glyphosate from our repertoire, which is really good, and also looking at more tree planting and filling in our GIS data gaps. So where we've got bits of land that don't have active management on, we'd like to have more data around what the habitat is there, so we can start to build management plans. So as I've explained, the grounds maintenance side of things is more around adjusting our methods so that we can spread it out across lots of sites as quickly as possible. The land regeneration projects are more around more intense project management. So, and some of these examples include an urban wilding research project that we've got on a couple of sites where we're testing out different ways of managing green space, monitoring the soil carbon, monitoring the flora diversity, and trying to work out which ones provide most for nature against kind of management costs and tenant perceptions and things. We've also had community gardens where we've provided planting and planters and kind of infrastructure and let the community manage a space themselves and plant their vegetables and make their own meadows, which has been really good to see. And it might even be kind of really small scale, simple projects where we've got green space that doesn't really have anything on it, but allowing people, some more benches and some planters and letting them pick the plants themselves, just having kind of more of a community feel to those green spaces. And as I mentioned before, doing tree planting, hedge planting, doing some more kind of, landscape design on some of our kind of blank canvas green spaces that we've got. So on to new developments. Obviously, the biodiversity net gain is really the key thing here, but engaging with those development teams, trying to embed the consideration for B&G as early on in the process as possible. Encouraging them to look at biodiversity net gain surveys as early on as in the process as possible to be able to really assess the constraints they've got on site. And encourage more of that kind of habitat creation and thinking more about, it's not just the amount of space that you've got, but it's also what you put on there. And we've also done things like we've recently done a pilot where we've kind of modelled a couple of different approaches to an estate design and see which one has a better value for biodiversity net gain. But also trying to get through to them that actually it's not just about biodiversity net gain, and that if B&G wasn't a policy that came about, we should be trying to deliver habitat management and nature access as a kind of a default feature of new build estates. So just on how we kind of have been monitoring this so far, we've got really good GIS data that we can map out where we're doing interventions and kind of have an area-based figure of the work that we've been doing. We've also got our the surveys that we do with different projects, especially our meadow rollout project, and then for some of the land regeneration projects we've been doing on the ground species surveys or soil carbon monitoring. But certainly an area that we'd probably like to do more on and perhaps get a kind of more succinct metric, which is obviously quite a complicated thing to do in nature at times, to find the kind of that right balance of meaningful, that gives you a meaningful picture of what's happening on the ground versus something that we can roll out in a way that's affordable and accessible to us in the housing sector. And of course, crucially to all of this is, how do we communicate what we're trying to do? How do we raise awareness of nature in the hope that people then, take on more nature-friendly activities in their own lives? And also, how do we kind of outreach and work with other organisations, especially where we've got land in the same areas, that we can try and amplify the effect of what we're trying to do. So we've done lots of news articles, we've done lots of social media articles. We've also run workshops for staff and tenants with organisations like Greengage and Garden Organic. We've done tree planting on our sites with East Suffolk Council. We've done internal staff volunteering days where we've planted bulbs. And it might just be simple things like local authorities wanting to place habitat features such as this bee cafe on the bottom centre, and kind of going through highways and allowing it to be sited on our land. We've also done free seed packets for staff as well. So it's just really experimenting with different communications methods and doing a bit of a tour of teams internally and giving this presentation to them as well, and talking about the value of nature and why it's important to us. So and kind of trying to bring them along with on this journey. And just thinking about kind of opportunities for us as an organization, using our work to help our reputation really. There's obviously nature and environmental issues are being more and more valued, and we should be shouting about the work that we've been doing. We've been nominated for awards, we've had good press, we've received awards from community groups for some of our meadows, and this year we held our first biodiversity event, inviting colleagues from across the sector, as well as from local authorities and consultants and wildlife trusts. So again, just trying to spread the message out there in the hope that other organisations then mirror what we're trying to do and do more for nature as well. I think one area that we'd like to do more in is tap into the kind of the ESG finance and sustainable linked loans. We know that Orbit have done a really good job with kind of having a biodiversity KPI attached to their sustainability linked loan. So we feel like that there's, in order to get that greater value at a higher level internally, knowing that it's then attached to our finances could then raise the profile of our biodiversity work and make it kind of more essential to the business. And as I mentioned at the start, we're kind of going through a merger at the moment, and thinking more widely in the future, rather than kind of evaluate Flagship's biodiversity plan, how do we then kind of formulate a unified nature recovery strategy, which then has more sites available to us, more capacity to do more, to kind of create more sites that are more nature friendly across England. So hopefully there's more to come from that area. And obviously with emerging nature recovery strategies, that for us is such a good tool for prioritizing actions and prioritizing sites. Take Norfolk, for example, and their kind of preliminary LNRS map. How can we plot our sites on top of that, which then kind of dictates where our priorities are for delivering nature on our sites as well, so we can complement the important sites for nature in Norfolk and Suffolk and wider and beyond. So that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell, really. And other avenues that we'd like to explore is kind of more around financial innovations. How do we kind of capitalize on our green assets, and kind of push on further with the merger and formalize nature at kind of strategic level. But the newly formed organization's motto is enabling people to thrive, and certainly we're not going to be able to do that if we're not contributing to nature recovery, which has such an important impact on people's lives. So yeah, that's the what we're doing at Flagship. I hope it's been helpful, and happy to take any questions on it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniel. It's really informative and really lovely to hear again, actually, about those partnerships that are so important. We've had a few webinars recently, and working together and building partnerships has been key in all of them. Right, we do have some time for questions. So we've had a few in already. Jess has sent us a question. She asked, did you have any pushback from the ground maintenance team about doing something different and working in a different way? And also any resident complaints about the areas, not being looked after properly?
Yes, so in my first year working at Flagship, it was quite tricky to get real progress with the grounds maintenance team. I think particularly around the fear of complaints coming in and how to deal with that. There was a bit of a change of management at that team, and actually the person that came in was much more open to that. And the team in general were much more open to trying something new and giving it a go. So I got quite lucky in that sense of sometimes it really is that, who leads a certain team can really have an influence on the culture and how to make progress there. So, I mean, since then, actually, it's been an absolute dream, really. And a lot of the stuff that they've been doing now has been so proactive, especially with kind of the trialing the removal of glyphosate, or they've started looking at horticultural training or booking training with Field Study Council. So yeah, I got quite lucky early on, and that's been really helpful for me. And then on the complaint side of it, so just to give a picture from last year, which is our biggest survey so far, we got about a 10% response rate. I'd say about 60% of that response was negative, most of which was around the messiness.
Mm.
Um, and it's kind of for us to say, well, we know that we need to manage our land more responsibly. What is the right reason for not doing that? Sometimes it's access, and that's fine. Sometimes it's making sure we've got accessible play spaces for people, and that's where we're happy to be flexible. We didn't see it being untidy as a good enough reason to not do something that we know is beneficial to everyone.
Yeah,
Um, and it's a matter of opinion as well, isn't it? It's a matter of taste, and we do have plenty of people that say it's nice as well. Um, but if it's a 60% of a 10% response rate, we know that actually the majority of people that are affected by it you know either like it but not enough to rave about it, or aren't fussed, or aren't too bothered enough to then come back and complain about it. So
yeah,
I think it's trying to strike the right balance of when to make a change if there is a complaint.
definitely. And again, it's that partnership, isn't it? It's about talking to people and raising that awareness of why things are being left as they are. Um, Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see, who else have we got here? Hilary has asked about when you're cutting meadows, are you able to remove the cuttings? And if so, what do you do with them?
So when we first started, we didn't remove the cuttings, with the idea that we obviously knew that the best practice would be to remove the cuttings, but you have that element of what do you do with the green waste and the cost associated with that. And because we're service charge based, we didn't want to increase cost for residents, because we knew that also that would, we'd probably really lose people if they started, incurring extra cost when trying to do a nature initiative. So initially, the team had mowers that cut it down, cut the kind of cuttings down to a point where they weren't that noticeable on site. And for us, it was about knowing that if you've got a gradient of what's really good for nature and what's really bad for nature, we will probably started here. If we can get anywhere further along that gradient, then that's a good win for us. But over the years, the team have kind of tweaked their plan, tweaked their kind of management plans, and now are able to kind of bail up the cuttings and use them either on site, either as um, mulch for shrub beds, or there is a push to put compost bins on site as well. So the idea is that for meadow areas, we do rake it up and use it on site elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you. Talking about management plans, Siri also asked, do you have develop a management plan for each site?
So it's not so we've, other than our kind of GIS data, which kind of maps out where all the grass is, where the shrub beds are, the frequency, and any extra details around that. The management plan isn't done for each site, but done as a universal kind of document. So we've got a meadow management plan, which is applied for all the meadow areas. But everything is, on an interactive GIS map. I mean, from that, our in-house GIS colleague can produce kind of site maps, site booklets, for all the teams, so they know when they go on site where they're cutting the grass, how often they do it. But in general, we're trying to move more towards a kind of more autonomous way of working, so that the site teams, rather than going to site and having to cut 16 times a year and kind of doing it in this very kind of specified way, we're trying to set it out so actually you go to site, your site, you have to try and manage it in the way that you think is best, and that includes adding more habitat and perhaps cutting back a hedge from a pathway if it's needed, even though it's not the right time of year, or all these sorts of things. So whereas in the past it was, we would also tell customers that you pay for 16 cuts, so then it would get to a point where if there was a particularly dry period in summer, where you couldn't cut the grass, we would then try and figure out how to fit those extra cuts that we've missed in, later on in the year, which didn't make sense because it'd be November and not the best time to then cut grass. So it's it didn't really make sense from an outcomes point of view for a site. So now it's trying to be more autonomous and giving people more of an outcomes based approach to their sites.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Terry asks, have you had much opportunity to trial biodiversity enhancements through retrofitting schemes such as water management and SUDS, a provision of planters or SUDS?
Sorry, sorry, say that again. I'm sorry, I just missed this
Yeah.
first part of that.
So have you had much opportunity to trial biodiversity enhancements through retrofitting schemes, e.g. through water management, like SUDS and provision of planters?
So yeah, so that's where the land regeneration projects come in. So that would be things like talking to the community. Are there benches that we can provide? We've done raised planters. Not so much, the SUDS tends to be more around new development, but I know it's certainly again an avenue that we'd like to explore further, especially where you have climate risk mapping and flood risk mapping. If we can then target those sites that are particularly prone to flooding and try some of the nature-based interventions there. I think ideally we'd get to a place where we've got 3 areas of site prioritization. One where it complements existing nature, so that's where perhaps local nature recovery strategies come in, and the data from that. One which links to lack of access to nature, and the other which links to climate resilience, and that's where perhaps we'd look at rain gardens and SUDS. But today, the SUDS have mainly been around the new developments, but we have done kind of other retrofitting things around extra planting, putting in planters, putting in benches, these sorts of things.
Siri asks about watercourses. Do you have any on any of the sites? And if yes, what nature recovery have you encouraged along the watercourses?
I think I'm only aware of one that has a kind of direct access to a watercourse,
Okay.
and we haven't done anything with it yet. But otherwise, we've also got a regeneration project in Thetford, which is close to one of the rivers, which is looking to do enhancements along there. But that'll be kind of a multi-year thing. But so no obvious projects at the moment that have got kind of watercourse based.
Got a comment from Katie who says thinks what you're doing sounds really good. So thanks for that comment, Katie. We had one about, let me see if I can find it, monitoring invertebrates. So what survey methodology do you use? And do you monitor invertebrates at all? That's from Melanie.
Not on a structured way at the moment. We've had a couple of residents who have done kind of the big butterfly count and things like that and sent in our data. But again, the monitoring has mainly been through kind of intervention-based monitoring and mapping out where we do our interventions rather than specific species monitoring. We have had the gardening teams kind of take photos of the meadows, almost like a top-down quadrat style photo, with the idea that we'd look at those photos and try and do floral species counts, or perhaps try to get like a really rough habitat classification from it. But we still need to analyze that data. And with our urban wilding pilots, it's mainly been floral surveys that have been done.
Brilliant. Jess has asked a little bit about funding and relaxed mowing can result in savings. But what about, all the other things you're trying to juggle? So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been quite lucky in that I've been supported, with a budget, and have been able, to do the kind of bench installations and planters and things like that from that budget. The grounds maintenance side is service chargeable, so the meadows so far have worked out at not being less money, but not being more cost. So we've tried to stay cost neutral with it, because to account for the kind of the longer it takes in the summer to cut them back and the investment in the seeds and things. But yeah, the kind of outside of the service charge, I've been lucky to be supported with the budget. And just on the invert surveys, if anyone has any kind of good ideas or for monitoring, a set of disparate sites and have a regular monitoring regime, I'm really keen to hear any ideas if anybody wants to get in touch.
Brilliant. Actually, Siri's just popped something in about the UK pollinator monitoring scheme. So with a link for you. So there you go,
Oh,
Daniel.
brilliant. Fantastic.
Let's have a look. We've only got a couple more questions. So if you have anything you want to ask Dan, please pop it in now. So we've got a question here about asking about how many community orchards do you have many, and how are you getting local tenants engaged?
I'm not aware of. I think we may have one community orchard, but I'm not certain on that. And in terms of engagement with residents, so we kind of have like a regular program through a meadow rollout. Again, we kind of do a lot of kind of articles, and it might be things like just meeting on site. You know, on last Friday we made a bug hotel with local children on one of our sites. It might be so kind of little engagement events like that.
Mm.
Or if we've got a project that we particularly want to do, it will be kind of setting out our intent to residents early on and trying to get as much feedback to then inform the design or the components of that project. It might be through letters and on-site meetings or phone calls, the kind of standard way of doing things.
Yeah, brilliant. Let's have a look. Stephanie's asked about conflict of interest, so things like plants growing up pavements and gutters, and then cutting down herbicide, and possibly incur more issue with surface into it. Can't even speak now. Integrity and drain blockage. So kind of that management on paths, I guess, and drains and
Yeah.
those kind of aspects.
Yeah, certainly working in nature and housing is a, you know, an area of work full of not conflict in it's in serious conflict, but there is that kind of working out what the best way forward is, and it might be things like our neighbourhoods team going out and clearing a front guard of a tenant who finds difficulty in managing it, and it's you know where that would have been full of brambles and inaccessible to the tenant is obviously a real benefit for nature, but then you've got the other side of it is of that tenant can't access their garden and have the benefits of being outdoors and having interactions with nature that way. So it's certainly a balance of case by case bases, and the more education that we do with our teams around green space management and habitats and the value of nature, hopefully then kind of shortens that gap between what's good for nature versus what's good for people, and in a way that balances both. So I think that will be an ongoing piece of work in urban environments and biodiversity and housing, and like you say, like plants you know, yeah clearing up gutters and trees with their leaves falling down. It's you're always going to have those cases where some people complain about it, but it's
Mm.
I guess trying to find the most sensible common sense way that doesn't automatically disadvantage nature in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Adele's asked about, says it's great to hear about flagship housing removing harmful chemicals, etc., from the ground maintenance, but what alternative methods of weed control have worked well?
So I think the grounds maintenance team have got some alternatives that are kind of organic based compounds. Some of them I think are vinegar based, but there is the acknowledgement that there is going to be, well, there'll be more weeds and there'll be more kind of manual attention on weeds. So they're going to trial it over the next 12 months with no glyphosate and see what the impact of the business is. But yeah, again, it's a tricky one where you know if we want to help nature, there is going to be more what people think is, to be unmessiness. So it's trying to um, just manage that and try and manage the messages as much as possible. But yeah, in terms of alternatives, there's some compounds that are kind of organic based, and just manual weeding will be another alternative. And the team continue to keep their eye out for other innovations that they can take advantage of. They've tried
Yeah.
a few things like foam stream, which they weren't too impressed with, and I think one of them was basically like a flamethrower for weeds, which I think was a health and safety nightmare in a urban environment. So that they quickly passed on that one.
Um, yeah, talking about your maintenance teams, really, Estelle asked, have they needed additional training in biodiversity conservation management?
So we have done training sessions. We've had sessions from Green Gauge on different topics, and it's also quite pertinent because you know as we build new homes as well, the teams that will be managing that biodiversity, the BNG liability for 30 years will be our in-house grounds maintenance team. So it's certainly important that they're aware of that and are competent in managing certain habitats. But yeah, we've done training sessions with Green Gauge, we've done training sessions with Garden Organic. The team is looking at kind of a horticultural qualification for the gardening team. Um, they're also looking at biodiversity awareness with the Field Studies Council. So really just keeping our eye out for as many opportunities as we can. And I budget in training sessions into my budget as well because it's we know how important it is, and they seem to really enjoy the sessions whenever we have them as well. So there's certainly that keenness to learn more.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I think we've got to the end of most of the questions there. We've got a few people that have popped in a few comments, Dan, so you might want to have a make sure you have a read of those. And Dan has said he's quite happy for us to share his email address afterwards. So when I send a follow-up email, I'll pop that in. So if you want to get in touch and maybe find out a bit more, Dan will be pleased to hear from you. So thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for all your hard work. It's very inspiring. And I think given lots of people lots of things to think about in their own journeys and roles and responsibilities. So
Yeah, well, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to you all and for the kind comments as well and really enjoyed the questions as well. So yeah, if anyone wants to chat more, please do get in touch with me.